Hello everyone, I'm Alan Fisher. On this episode of AZ Illustrated Science, the latest in heart technology. Also, researchers create a mathematical model to study the Lyme disease bacteria, and local police officers train how to respond to people with mental health disorders in order to prevent a crisis situation from developing. But first, here's a look at the day's top stories.
On a 15-13 vote, the full Arizona Senate this afternoon gave preliminary approval to a bill prohibiting the state from participating in the Common Core education standards. Arizona adopted those standards 4 years ago. The proposal is sponsored by Southern Arizona State Senator Al Melvin. Democrats, including Tucson State Senator David Bradley, asked Melvin what specifically he doesn't like about the Common Core standards. Melvin told Bradley to find the offending sections himself. He went on to say Arizona can do a better job coming up with standards than the federal government. Supporters of Common Core, including the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry, say the standards will better prepare students for the future. Arizona and most states have already begun implementing the standards. The proposal still needs votes from the full House and Senate before being sent to the governor. 72% of Arizona voters surveyed over the weekend by Public Policy Polling say they support Governor Jan Brewer's veto of SB 1062. That was the bill that would have given legal protection to businesses who refused to serve people because of religious objections. And that's a look at tonight's headlines.
All too often, we hear of encounters between police and people living with mental health illness that ends tragically. But here in Southern Arizona, the Tucson Police Department has spent the past decade trying to change that. Gisela Tellis reports on local efforts to build a crisis intervention team.
It's a crisp Friday morning, and Tucson police are talking a jumper off a ledge.
I had these shoes that would allow me to I can bounce. I can just bounce over the traffic. I can make sure that everything looks okay.
Why don't you come over here and show me those shoes? I'd like to see them.
The exchange is serious business, but today, no one's life is on the line. These officers are taking part in Pima County's Crisis Intervention Team Training, or CIT.
Let me think about it.
Over 40 intense hours, they're learning what to do when they're called to help someone who's having a mental health crisis.
Where'd you get those shoes from? I found them this morning. They were under my bed.
We have attorneys come out, a judge come out, and he talks about mental illness. We have a psychiatrist come out. He talks about different diagnoses, different medications, and how to interact with somebody that might be in an acute state.
Give me my stinking clutch!
We also have instruction on de-escalation techniques. So it's not just about talking to the individuals that suffer with a mental illness, it's a lot of other professionals in the community that come out here and are pretty passionate about giving the time to the officers to make sure that we're doing what we can.
The officers learn from a range of experts about the medical, legal, and day-to-day realities of mental illness. They also talk to people who are living with mental illness and their family members about what it's like to experience a mental health crisis and what has helped or harmed them when dealing with law enforcement.
When you go on your calls, just be aware of it.
Above all, officers learn to see the person within the crisis and not just the diagnosis or the behavior. For training coordinator Sergeant James Kirk, a cancer survivor, that hits very close to home.
We try to teach them as well, to look at the person and not say he's a schizophrenic, because, people don't look at me and say he's a cancer. He's somebody that suffers with a mental illness, and they are a person aside from that, and they have dreams and hopes and lives just like us.
It was really hard to be at the point that I am right now.
Kirk ran CIT trainings for 8 years before his retirement from the Tucson Police Department. Along the way, he helped train SWAT team members, probation officers, and police from Tucson, Marana, and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He says the program can have a huge impact on even the most seasoned officers.
And I'll be the first to admit, being a cop for 25 years, we get a little bit cynical. And you start looking at everybody in the same light. And so you come here and most of the officers go, I need to take a step back and to maybe take a look at individuals in a different light and maybe consider that there may be other factors that I don't know about. We had a SWAT sergeant that went through the class a couple years ago, and he's kind of your, when he came into the class, I'm like, I wonder how he's gonna embrace the class. He's a tough guy, he's got a tough attitude, and he went through the class, and at the end of the week he said it was one of the best classes that he went through in his 20-year career.
The classes aren't just engaging, they're also effective. A 2011 study by researchers at Emory University and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation found that CIT-trained officers are significantly less likely to use force with someone in a psychiatric crisis.
And when somebody is agitated, and we go in there and we agitate the situation more, all we really do is create a more agitated situation. So we want them to go in, and we teach them to go in and just take a breath, slow down, take your time, be calm, and time is on our side in these situations where people are in crisis.
It helped me get back on my feet.
Crisis intervention team training was developed in Memphis, Tennessee in the late 1980s, but it took over a decade to make its way to Tucson, and its path here began with a tragedy. Retired NYPD detective Joseph Mashensky watched his son find success in the Tucson restaurant business despite periodic bouts of depression. But by September of 2000, work pressures and relationship troubles sent his son spiraling into a crisis.
Next thing I know, we get a call a couple minutes before midnight, saying there's going to be no tomorrow.
Mashensky called the police, hoping they could help track down his son. He soon learned the young man was in his apartment and rushed there with the police close behind. Then the police asked him to leave.
I wouldn't leave, and they physically forced me to leave, made me go downstairs. Right? Next thing I know, or we know, we're sitting downstairs at the bottom of the steps. There's another sheriff's deputy comes in a sheriff's jumpsuit with a dog. And they take the dog up there. And we could hear screaming and yelling. And then all of a sudden there are 4 shots. Right? I ran up the stairs. The dog is tied on the 2nd floor. My son lives on the 3rd floor. He's tied on the stairs on the 2nd floor. I go up there, and my son's laying dead in the doorway of his apartment. I tried to run to my son, and they tackled me and forced me to the ground and forced me to leave again.
In the wake of his loss, Mashensky heard about the Memphis program and decided to take a closer look.
And from 1988 up until 2000, they had only killed 6 people in these types of situations. Here in Tucson at that time, we were killing 6-8 people a year in these situations. Right? Then 85% reduction in arrests, 40% reduction in injuries to people with mental health issues, 90% reduction in injuries to officers. All these statistics, I said, hey, this is a better program. We got to do something like that.
With the support of the Community Partnership of Southern Arizona, Mashensky traveled to Memphis, learned the CIT curriculum, and soon rallied the support of community members and law enforcement and behavioral health agencies.
We had about 40 people put a meeting once a week. We put all the curriculum together with the Sheriff's Department, with the Tucson Police Department. And my son was killed in September of 2000. In April of 2002, we had our first CIT class.
Since then, CIT has quickly grown. There are now nearly 3,000 CIT programs nationwide, and hundreds of officers have been trained in southern Arizona alone. Officer Brandon Tatum of the Tucson Police Department would like to see the trainings grow even more.
Is he saying that he's in denial, or is it just he can't structure himself enough to continue to take his medication?
After 2.5 years on the job, Tatum sought out CIT training and found it invaluable.
I really wish that everybody that is in law enforcement, everybody in my division and everybody in the department have some sort of training, because I think that over the years there have been a disconnect between law enforcement and citizens, and they feel like we don't understand them, we're too aggressive, and I think that can be, displayed, in a bad way if we don't understand. And I think that with training like this, it helps us bridge the gap.
Tatum says he learned to approach a crisis with more compassion, and that's exactly what Joseph Mashensky has hoped and worked for.
I think people are becoming more aware of what's happening, that people with mental health issues need to be treated fairly, they need to be treated right, And I think that's starting to happen, at least in our community.
Now, Mashensky is pushing for the University of Arizona Police Department to take part in CIT. The UAPD has cited its extensive on-campus mental health resources and its in-house training program as the reason it hasn't participated. The university is proud of its self-sufficiency, says UAPD spokesperson Sergeant Filbert Barrera.
We do a really good job communicating with these students and caring for these students to get them the services on campus and off campus. But I will say, from the department standpoint, I would say that any further training or anything that would provide a different perspective, I think it would be a good thing.
Mashensky says the perspective that CIT provides can protect officers and save lives. And in a way, it has saved his life, too.
We had this unfortunate incident. I worked probably 60 hours a week. Right? It gave us something to do. Now, to be truthful, I feel very good that I think we've accomplished. And again, I don't want to take the credit. It's not just us. It's the community. We had a lot of people involved in this. Right? I think we, the community, have actually accomplished something.
When caught early, Lyme disease is usually easy to treat. But if missed, this tick-borne infection can cause significant cardiac, neurological, cognitive, and other health problems. Some local researchers have come up with a mathematical model to better understand how the Lyme bacteria spreads in its early stages. Anna Augustowska sat down with two members of the research team, physicist Charles Wolgamuth and graduate student Kumar Dhruv.
Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You both have been working on the mathematical model that will help guide treatment for Lyme disease. So before we get into details, please tell us a little bit about what Lyme disease is and how does it manifest itself.
Okay, yeah, so Lyme disease is a disease that's caused by a bacterial infection. The bacteria are transmitted to people by tick bites. This is predominantly in the upper Midwest and the northeast of the United States, as well as parts of Europe. Once the tick bites you, the bacteria get into your system and then they can start to move through your body. And the disease kind of manifests itself first as typically a large rash that appears on your skin. The bacteria, though, can move to different parts of your body, like your central nervous system, your joints, your heart, and can cause then complications in those areas, typically due to your own immune response, which is what the rash is also. It's caused by your immune cells trying to fight off the bacteria.
Drew, could you please tell us about the mathematical model you've been working on?
Yeah, so the model all started with Charles and I were having some just conversations about looking at maybe the patient-host interactions of the disease. And what's interesting is it actually started off as a class project here at the University of Arizona, a class I took. It was a quantitative modeling of biological systems. And we did a very preliminary early stage version of the model, just looking at the bacteria interacting with macrophages, so your immune cells, and that actually changes over time. Mm-hmm. And after the class was over, then we said, can we expand this out to actually look at more of how does the rash then evolve over time? And once we got the rash part working, it was, well, now let's throw in some drug treatments like antibiotics or typical treatments for Lyme disease. Can we see how then the antibiotics affect, for instance, the rash appearance? So that's sort of how the model came about.
So how are you working with this model right now?
So right now we're planning to kind of advance the model. Right now it kind of only describes the way that the bacteria interact with your immune system while they're in your skin. Of course, you'd like to know what happens once they get into your blood and how they get into these other tissues, and so we're working on that currently.
So Drew, what is fascinating about this bacteria for you?
For me, it's how invasive it is, I think, and how it's able to go through so many different types of environments, whether they're highly viscous environments, something like honey you would think of, or something maybe that's more viscoelastic, something that's think of like Jell-O, for instance, that they're able to move through these all different types of environments, and these environments really don't hinder their movement at all. They're able to transverse them and invade and go to different locations throughout our body. So, how they're actually able to do this is one of the interesting aspects of it for me.
So you mentioned that this model will help guide the treatment for Lyme disease. How exactly? Could you give us more details about it?
Yeah, so what the model kind of tells us is where the bacteria are in your body due to kind of the appearance of the rash. and how things like, as Drew mentioned, antibiotics are going to affect the concentration or the numbers of bacteria in your body as a function of time. And one of the kind of interesting things that we found is that the rash appearance doesn't necessarily indicate how well or not well the antibiotics are working. And so you could take antibiotics and end up still having a rash, but all the bacteria have been cleared from your system. So it kind of lets you know that, kind of the typical treatments that are being given are actually kind of viable for clearing the bacteria from our systems.
Drew, where does this research lead you to? Is there anything else connected to this particular research that you can based on and move on to the
Right,
next
so more future work,
Yes.
right, what we're currently thinking about. So I think just in terms of Lyme disease would be, now that we sort of have the early stages down in a simple model, would be building in more of what's actually going on and saying, can we see how, how the disease progresses to later stages? Can we actually start doing that from modeling standpoints? But one of the beauties of modeling, though, is that we can also take this and say, let's look at other infectious diseases that causes a rash, for instance, right, on your skin, that are due to an interaction between a pathogen and your immune response. So let's take another disease like that and use the same sort of setup and thought process and see if we can tackle then other diseases like that.
Like other diseases like syphilis?
Yeah, for example, syphilis would be one of them, because the bacteria that causes syphilis and the bacteria that causes Lyme disease are very closely related to one another. So syphilis is one example.
So I haven't asked you, Charles, how did you get interested in Lyme disease and the study of it and this model?
Yeah, so we got interested in Lyme disease from the bacterial side, that the bacterium is really a very kind of fascinating organism. It's kind of much longer and thinner than a lot of bacteria, and it's able to move through whatever environments it's in just by undulating its body, kind of like a snake moves. And this is probably one of the main reasons that it's so invasive and able to go into places like our central nervous system. So kind of trying to figure out how that works from a kind of physics perspective is one of the things that has really interested me.
Are you planning on working with medical communities on this project too?
We collaborate a little with a clinician at Yale University. How far that's going to go, we don't know yet. We'll have to kind of wait and see.
Thank you both for joining us tonight.
I'm Judy Woodruff. On the next NewsHour, President Obama unveils his budget blueprint for the coming year. That's Tuesday on the PBS NewsHour.
Singer-songwriter Linda Perhacs released her first album back in 1970.
Surrounded by the hippie culture in that environment, I try to figure out what's going on out here. New clothing, new food, new music.
Her second album is out this week. I'm David Green, an unlikely rock star on the Next Morning Edition from NPR News.
Artificial heart technology has come a long way since the 1950s, when an artificial heart was successfully transplanted into a dog. Syncardia's CEO and president Michael Garippa, along with biomedical engineer and chief technology officer Rich Smith, are here to show us how technology has changed and some of what patients can expect to see in the future. Michael and Rich, thanks so much for joining us today.
For having us.
Rich, you're holding in your hand one of Syncardia's total artificial heart devices. Can you tell me for whom this device is intended?
These are for the very sickest of patients we call that are in the last stages of what we call heart failure, which means that something's wrong with their heart, that it's not working. And so they're, in most cases, close to death. And those are the ones that we basically replace the heart, put this in, and give them basically a good heart back again.
And is this a permanent heart at this time, or is this a bridge to transplant heart, Rich?
This is a bridge to transplant heart. So the idea is to get to a heart transplant and then take this out.
But Michael, in the future, you're looking to make this more of a permanent solution?
The FDA has agreed that this heart should have a destination therapy approval, and so later this year we'll be launching what's called a DT trial to prove that the heart will be safe for people on a long-term basis.
Okay. And this is approved at this point by the FDA for use in the United States, correct?
Absolutely, and has been since 2004.
Okay. And how many transplants, how many of these devices have been transplanted into people so far?
Well, we know we've implanted nearly 1,300. and we have just about a 70% overall transplant rate. During our clinical trial, called a PMA, that was published in the New England Journal, led by Dr. Copeland when he was here in Arizona, we had a 79% bridge to transplant rate. However, the patients that go home with our new Freedom Driver in the United States have reached 87% bridge to transplant or alive on the device.
And Michael, could you tell us, you mentioned the new driver. Tell us a little bit about that and also the new heart you're holding in your hand.
Well, before the Freedom Driver was put into trial, all patients had to stay tethered to one of the hospital drivers, and they could not go home because they were driven by wall air in the hospital. The Freedom Driver has now let nearly 200 patients worldwide go home from the hospital, work, live, be with their families while patiently waiting for one of the relatively few organs to become available.
And Michael, can a patient with the small driver undertake all the basic things they do throughout the day that they would have done had they not had a heart transplant?
Not only have they proven that all activities in daily living can be done, but some activities we don't necessarily even endorse. We've had people go four-wheeling, we've had people do Tai Chi, we've had people cycle and run and do everything but swim.
And could you tell me a little bit about the heart you're holding in your hand there, Michael, please?
This is our new 50cc heart. It will go into trial this year in the United States and be approved in Europe. This will triple the number of eligible candidates based on the size required. This will help pediatrics and a lot of little old ladies get an artificial heart because we'll be able to implant this and still close their chest.
So for example, someone who could not utilize this larger heart will be able to use the smaller one then?
Absolutely. The blood flow is 6 liters per minute, more than enough. But the heart Rich is holding that we've implanted 1,300 times, this might have been implanted 4,200 times had it been available.
And Rich, what is the size difference between these two hearts?
The size difference is how much it actually holds. Well, this holds 70 milliliters of blood, and that holds 50. The key is that when we take the patient's heart out, this has to fit in the space. And so, for example, you could have somebody that's smaller that their heart has gotten very large in terms of the heart failure, and this one will fit. So we've actually put this in patients as young as 9 years old. But Michael's heart there will pretty much take care of all the adult population in the world and get into the teenagers and possibly into smaller, depending on the size of the space.
Okay. And Rich, this device is what would normally be seen in a hospital, correct?
Correct. This is the old, what we call the Big Blue, which is a console that when we go right out of surgery, that's what they're on, and it provides a capability of adjustments that the patient needs at that point in time.
Okay, and Rich, we have about 10 seconds left. Could you tell me where all these products are manufactured?
Right here in Tucson, and always have been, and always will be, hopefully.
Great. Well, Michael and Rich, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
A pacemaker is a small device implanted just under the skin that controls abnormal heartbeat. One major challenge for device manufacturers is the pacemaker battery, which, for obvious reasons, must be safe, reliable, and long-lasting. The Sarver Heart Center's Dr. Marvin Slepian is here to tell us about a new battery technology powered by the heart itself. Marvin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Marvin, you've brought some examples of pacemakers and other heart devices. Could you briefly describe how they work and how they're powered, please?
Sure. Pacemakers are small devices, little electronic, computer-like devices. They're inserted into the chest. They have a lead which is used to send a signal out for arrhythmias or for blocks to give a very regular heartbeat, but they require a battery. And there are other similar devices like a defibrillator which sends a shock, or a device that can maintain or monitor rhythms. All these require batteries. The limitation with this type of technology is that, unfortunately, when the battery starts to run out, you physically have to remove these devices, which requires surgery and a reoperation. What we've been working on is the concept that we potentially could develop a system which would use the motion of the heart itself to convert mechanical energy into electrical energy. I should say, first off, that this is a joint project with Dr. John Rogers and Canon de Givron from the University of Illinois. We have a strong collaboration between the two schools. So the idea that we have is that we've developed a system using what's called piezoelectrics or piezoelectronics. Piezoelectric materials are little crystalline materials which, when you strike them, they convert mechanical energy or force by virtue of stress and strain into an electrical current. And that can generate power, which actually could be captured and could be utilized to either charge the battery of a pacemaker or beyond to actually completely replace the battery. We recently published a paper, it was in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, where we implanted this type of system directly on the heart. We also put it on the lung, and with the natural beating of the heart or with the excursion of breathing, we were able to convert by the impact from this system into an electric current, which actually was then fed back to a battery and showed that we could both charge and power the pacemaker.
So the heart's actual movement is what's powering the pacemaker then, Marvin?
That's correct.
Okay. And in terms of this device, would you need a backup for this, or is this something that you would use by itself without a battery?
Well, like any new technology, we always try to build in some redundancies. So I would imagine, of course, we have to go through trials, and there's the FDA. What we envision to begin with is that this would be utilized as a backup. But we believe that as systems become more robust and as the energy demand of these devices goes down, this could become a primary system with a very small battery inside as the backup rather than this as the backup.
Okay.
So that's the future.
And looking at your team's technology, what are some other applications that this could be aimed at?
So our whole concept with this technology is that there's a big shift going on in medicine. I think we're all aware that there's a change in medicine where we're wearing sensors, we're putting devices on, people are wearing activity bands, and more we're using technology that will be on the patient to monitor their status, hopefully to reduce the need for hospitalization, to reduce the need to come to the emergency room. We'll have all these sensing, diagnostic, and therapeutic systems. They're active. They all require power. So our goal has been to be able to develop these kind of polymer systems that could be utilized to power these types of devices. I think we recognize that the medical device of the future may very well be your cell phone, where you'll be wearing some small applique that will telemeter to this, which then gets telemetered to the physician or the hospital, but this requires power. So with these piezoelectric type technologies, we could develop systems that could be on the whole patient. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the inside. We developed this first strategy using the motion of the heart, but you can imagine that we could develop a suit of clothing or other type of bands that are put on as you exercise, as you walk. This could be put on your shoes. With the impact of walking, the striking of your heel could generate the mechanical activation that then gets converted to electricity. So we envision the body electric, where effectively these will be safe, you will not be shocked, but these will be safe systems that we can capture energy and utilize it in a more efficient manner.
Well, Marvin, I want to thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's our show. To keep up with the latest news and watch segments from this and other editions of AZ Illustrated, go to our website, news.azpm.org. I'm Alan Fisher. Thanks for watching.